Social Network on Personal Meaning and the Conference Planning Committee. We'd like to welcome you this morning. And I want to give the speaker maximum amount of time. And I'm just going to make 2 housekeeping announcements. Okay? Number 1, if you have paid parking tickets, parking is complimentary. Okay? You don't have to pay, but in case you have paid, you can bring it to the desk and you get refund. Secondly, lunches. You can pay $20 for all-inclusive lunch, buffet, beautiful, tips included, everything. But also, if you say, I don't eat very much at lunch, and you can also order a la carte. Okay? If you have any questions?
To introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Dr. Emmy Van Deurzen. Dr. Van Deurzen joins us from England, where she's the director at Dilemma Consultancy in Sheffield and the New School of Psychotherapy and Counseling in London. Dr. Van Deurzen has written numerous books, including Everyday Mysteries, and is Caversham, Lillian, is Caversham here today? Okay. Okay, and you should be able to... Okay. So hopefully we'll have some of Dr. Van Deurzen's books there at Caversham's bookstore down the hall, down the way here. So I won't take us any longer because I know Emmy has got a lot to pack into 50 minutes. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Van Deurzen.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Enjoyed the workshop yesterday a lot. For those of you who were at the workshop, you will recognize some of my presentation, but I will go over this stuff about emotions much more quickly than I did yesterday. Okay, here are some websites you might be interested in. The top one is the New School of Psychotherapy and Counseling, which, amongst other things, a little plug here, runs an online master's program which you can do from anywhere in the world. So do check it out if you're interested in a master's in psychotherapy. That's my own website where you can find some of this information. Probably most importantly, Society of Psychotherapy .uk is where you can find a podcast of my talk on emotions that I gave yesterday if you want to find out more. Okay, so that's me. You've already heard that. These are the places where we work in London and in Sheffield. These are some of the books I have published. The thing I'm most proud of really is that my work has now been translated into 16 languages, including Chinese and Korean and Russian and Hebrew. So that's really lovely. And here are some more of my books, but that's the recent books that came out this year, a book on skills and a book on existential coaching. And this is the book that will come out in the autumn, which is the 3rd edition of my book, Existential Counseling and Psychotherapy in Practice. This is the one I'm writing with Digby Tantrum at the moment on emotional well-being and health, which will come out a little bit later. But that's probably the book that is most relevant to the talk, which is my book on psychotherapy and the quest for happiness. Okay, where do I come from? What gives me the right to talk about these things? Well, I'm a sort of mixed person. On one side, my mother's side, they were Danish aristocrats who were thrown out of Denmark when Bismarck took over. They were religious leaders and they had to flee. So they were refugees in the Netherlands. and had to become coppersmith to earn their living because they lost everything. In the Second World War, my mother's family's house was bombed in The Hague. They were homeless, moved to the east of the Netherlands, to Arnhem, which for some of you may already ring a bell. They got bombed again in Arnhem and spent the rest of that war in hospital recovering from the bombing. So very hard work. On my father's side, Central European gypsies, bit of input, who became Dutch barge skippers, and then my grandfather and my father worked in the antiques business and became the head of a large antique auction in the center of The Hague, where they ran an operation in the Second World War for people, especially the Dutch Fire Brigade, the Hague Fire Brigade, to hide away from the Nazis and to listen to the BBC secretly under the floorboards. So lots and lots of frightening things in my family, people being deported in the Second World War, people being shot because they were opposing the Germans. I won't go into the details, but basically I grew up with a lot of trauma in my family, who had nothing left after the war and had been through the fear of death. My father was hidden away for a year in a cold, freezing loft with no food, nearly died. It marked them deeply. Two good things it did. One is they took me camping every year across Europe to make me learn languages, visit other cultures, so that I would have an open mind and I would work with other people worldwide and prevent any world wars from happening. And the other good thing was that they taught me all the world religions so that I would make up my own mind about what I would believe in. Those are two things I value deeply. What they also gave me, though, is living in a tiny little flat where there was a lot of trauma and distress. My sister responded by fighting and by rebelling and by becoming very difficult to handle, including bullying me a great deal. I responded by feeling everything very deeply and kind of becoming schizoid and isolating myself. And basically finding my peace and my safety and my transcendence in my classical education, where Socrates became my savior. When I attempted suicide several times, he rescued me by showing me that perhaps those who feel deeply have something to contribute to the world, and they need to overcome their suffering, and they need to actually change something in the world by basically asking questions, by reflecting on what is wrong in the world and why people suffer, and to improve things. So that is really what I have dedicated my entire life to. How should we live? What is truth? What can we know in the world? What can we do to make the world a better place? And how can we work with other people who struggle with these things to help them find ultimate value in life? That is what I try to do in my psychotherapy practice. I started working in psychotherapy in the early 70s, exactly 40 years ago, when I was studying philosophy in France and started working in psychiatry as a philosopher. I took the risk to find my own way of working with people without having been trained in psychology. But later realized I didn't need the qualifications, went back to university and got my clinical psychology qualifications as well. But by that time, I couldn't really believe in psychology, and I have always aimed to bring philosophy and psychology together so that people can actually be helped to think for themselves, to find their own ideals, their own ideas, to learn to think for themselves, and to find a path through their crisis. I worked in a psychiatric hospital in France that was very special, where everything was done in large meetings, and where I had to learn very rapidly these skills to work with people and to connect and to help them through. After that, I was invited to come to London on the strength of the work I had done. To come to London, this is 1977, to work with, you might not now know, with the anti-psychiatrists R.D. Lang, Joe Berg and Morty Schatzman. And I lived and worked in therapeutic communities, working with people who had been diagnosed as schizophrenic, who had left the psychiatric hospital, and who, we worked with 24/7, living in with them, with no other places to live, and to help them really tackle those issues rather than labeling themselves as mentally ill. So the film last night was a bit of a flashback to those days for me, where this is exactly what we did, helping people reclaim their lives, finding the courage to live in the crisis, through finding persistence, resilience, and purpose in life. Nobody, though, is spared crisis and conflict. It isn't just those of us who become schizophrenic or those of us who become refugees that need to find a new way through. It can happen to all of us. Even if you play it safe and try to avoid catastrophes, which more and more people try to aim to do in their lives, you still get blows of fate. It is unavoidable. In fact, I would argue that every day to all of us brings small challenges, medium-sized challenges, and sometimes small challenges. And so the question, is suffering avoidable? I would answer with a resounding no, it is not avoidable. We have to be prepared to suffer, and so I believe it is important to teach people how to do suffering, how to be strong in the face of adversity. Is happiness desirable? Well, there's no doubt about it that we all like to be happy and like to avoid suffering. But maybe if we're too happy and too comfortable and too easy in life, actually it's counterproductive. And we lose the capacity to respond when it's necessary. But as you know, people crave happiness. In 2010, 60 million prescriptions were issued for antidepressants, which was a 10% increase on the previous year. And, SSRIs are called happy pills by many people. But what it actually does, of course, is it cuts down your brain function, and it takes you down to a much lower level of functioning. And it is still being seen as a panacea. In a BMJ paper entitled Explaining the Rise in Antidepressant Prescribing, the conclusion was that they are now being given no longer just for depression, they are being given as a panacea for almost any problems people come with to their doctors. So, in the previous years anyway, there was already a huge increase, and this is going on. People basically want to feel good. If they don't feel good, they very quickly conclude that there is something wrong with them. And that something that is wrong with them must be something in their brain, something that they can't set right themselves, that they need medical intervention to set right. Well, life cannot be an eternal spring, and so we need to get a bit more robust. Happiness as an ultimate value may well be what makes people feel that they're ill if they're not happy. To lose track of all the many other values that are available in life is a very big mistake. But what do we do when life is hard? Life is often hard because of fate, because of destiny, because this is how it works. Things go wrong. things aren't ideal, things are going to be difficult. To live is to face difficulty, to learn to deal with problems and with issues. What do you do in the Depression in 1936 when you have to move with your little kids and you don't know where to go or where to find enough money to eat? What do you do when a war starts and you used to be cozy and comfortable in your middle class life and suddenly everything is ripped away from you? What do you do when you find yourself in a concentration camp? I have worked a lot with Holocaust survivors because there is he's now dead, a psychiatrist called Jan Bastiaans, who used to work with LSD therapy in Holland, who used to refer me his London clients when I ran my private practice in London. And I had to really allow myself to face up to the kind of experience this was when working with people who could hardly even now face to think about it. This is a terrible thing to allow yourself to connect with. It is something you want to look away from. But when it happens to you, you have to find a way to stare it down and to deal with it. This evening we will see a film on Frankel, which I very much look forward to, because this is a topic very close to my heart. When I was a teenager, we had the Biafra crisis, which touched me very deeply because my parents had talked to me about how they had become emaciated in the Second World War when they were cut off from food for a year. And so I always felt incredibly scared this would happen to us again. And when it happened in Biafra, I got all my savings out of the bank and gave it to them. And I had a very moving experience happen to me just a few weeks ago, when one of my students in London, who was a minister from what used to be Biafra, told me that he was born in the middle of this crisis, and that in his village they had said to his mother, "Kill him when he's born, we can't feed another mouth." And his mother went away with him out of the village and rescued him. He then got rescued by the missionary service and then pledged his life to become a missionary himself. And then he came to study with me in London because he knew of my work with refugees. So I was incredibly deeply moved to see this little boy, who could be this little boy, that we saw these pictures of in those days. And to see him just would lift your heart. The amount of understanding, human compassion, and energy to make a difference to the world is absolutely amazing. And so you see, it's all about survival. It's all about human beings fighting with each other to find their own little way on the earth, their own little safe place on the earth to survive. And also, of course, human beings do the same to animals, because we have to eat and survive. Enough to make you a vegetarian, I think. But there is one of the ducks that has escaped, one of the geese that has escaped, and that's flying high in the sky. And that is my image of what I want to achieve with every single one of the people I work with, every single one of my students. To escape from this feeling of confinement, from this feeling of life being impossible, or being about the survival of the fittest, and to realize instead that actually it is about finding yourself, taking flight, and finding a purpose that allows you to rise above any obstacles, come across difficulties, crises and trauma, and go beyond it. Frankel's solution, of course, was a fantastic one. He said, you can find values experientially by what we take from the world, and to enjoy what is there given to us is a very important thing to cultivate. We can also find it by our creative values, by what we give to the world. And I think that is always the key to overcoming adversity. To find your own project, as we saw in the film last night. To find art to commit to, or the missionary service as for my student, or some other project that you know you can use your talents for and that will be of use to society at large. That is always what clicks the person out of their difficulties and their sense of lostness or distress and makes them zoom ahead towards a new future. But of course Frankel recognized that sometimes life is just so hard and things happen to you that are so intensely difficult that you have to then find your attitudinal values, which are about how to be with your suffering. And that is incredibly inspirational. For me, it was Socrates who taught me that rather than Frankel, who I came across much later. Socrates showed how it is possible to use your inner world, your inner connection to the universal, to make sense of the world, to reflect on life, and to always find safety in that inner reflection, no matter what. Not many people can do this. This is a study I was made aware of again in my LinkedIn group on existential therapy by a colleague of mine in Denmark, who I did quite a lot of work with in the 90s and in the noughties, Bo Jacobsen, who has been working with cancer patients a lot, and who has one of his studies is about how many people who face terminal illness were actually able to see their confrontation with death as some kind of advantage, some new experience that they could make something of, that they could make meaning of, and it was actually almost exactly 50% only. So there is an immense amount of work to be done. And Nietzsche saying that what does not kill me makes me stronger is certainly not always true. Some things that don't kill us may kill our spirit. And when we are at risk of that, we need to find a good therapist who can help us recover our spirit as well as our life. I've always thought Camus' little book, The Myth of Sisyphus, summed it up very nicely. He said, there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is whether life is or is not worth living. And I think that is what it amounts to at the end of the day. If a person does find that life is meaningful, that life is worth living to the best of your ability, they will overcome many adversities. They will, in difficult circumstances, find their sense of defiance, find their sense of rebellion against injustice, and will find a way around the obstacles. But, of course, for many people, what is actually difficult is that they don't find the meaning. Frankel, of course, talked about the vacuum of meaning. They actually live lives that aren't really challenging enough. Lives in which they hide away from difficulty so much that they get either bored or they get the feeling that it is banal and that things are always the same and aren't really worthwhile. And then they find a different kind of despair. Seligman once described depression as the common cold of psychopathology, which I think is a very good phrase indeed. It is at once familiar and mysterious. And so many people use these terms lightly, and so many people get stuck in the doldrums of feeling low and call it depression and medicalize it and take medication in order to get out of it. Do you remember the Holmes array scale of stressful events? Well, look at those. There are many things missing from those. When I was listening to your workshop yesterday, and the talk about losing children, for instance, it isn't even mentioned on there. Quite interesting. These are all difficulties that we deal with, but things can be a lot worse. When I work with people who have become refugees from various wars, for instance, Iraqi refugees who do not dare go back home, I meet people who are in intense distress, who actually feel that there is no horizon in their life anymore. Their future has been cut off. Speak about the here and now. They do not wish to be in that here and now. They want to get a sense of movement in their life, a sense of being able to retrieve something from the past that is of value, and to have a sense of future, to know that time is on their side again, that there is space for them in the world somewhere. So many people do not feel that. What about the Sudanese refugees who walk over land like this? There are actually many more people in the world who face these kinds of things than you realize. I've worked with quite a lot of Bosnian refugees after the war in the Balkans. Unbelievable distress. We think it all happened in the Second World War. Far from it. There are people in Lapland at the moment who are losing the right to roam freely between Norway, Sweden, and Finland. They are in dire distress, unknown to most of the world. I was in Athens last month, speaking in a public concert hall to many, many people who are in deep distress, very much like the Depression in 1936 in the USA. It is a huge economic crisis. Many people are losing absolutely everything. It is unbelievable. Of course, it leads to unrest as well, which people then also get very fearful about. The learning in these situations is a very individual learning, even though the situation may be a social, political, or cultural one. What about 9/11? What did that do to the USA? How did it affect people? Well, there is quite a lot of evidence that it has woken people up, that this terrible happening has made people think about things in a new way. How about the Japanese nuclear disaster? What is it like to be this girl who had to be in quarantine for several months, losing her parents and her little dog? What about these widows of the Afghanistan war, and I speak with feeling, having a son-in-law who is in the submarine in the Royal Navy, and having also a son-in-law really, who is just come back from Afghanistan. These are things that create pain and distress. Natural disasters too. This tornado in Alabama, imagine being in their position. That's your house. Everything's gone. How do people cope? What do we do? Would you be able to cope with crisis? Are you able to find that strength in yourself? I believe we need to challenge ourselves if we're going to work with other people who go through these kinds of things. In crisis, of course, you don't just lose your meanings, you lose your beliefs, and you lose all these illusions of comfort and safety that we live with a lot of the time. Now Heidegger, who is of course one of the philosophers who inspires my work, I actually did my doctorate in philosophy on Heidegger's authenticity and inauthenticity. Heidegger talks about aletheia, which is the Greek word for truth. And in Greek, that word means unhiddenness. And what he argues is that it is only possible to really see what is true when everything is ripped away from you. When you are back to what he considers to be our natural state, which is that of Unheimlichkeit, which is that of not being at home, being uncomfortable, being ill at ease. In other words, it is at the moments of your greatest adversity, of your deepest pain, of your greatest challenges, in these moments where you feel you won't be able to cope, but if you persist and you endure and you find a new purpose and you find a solution, it is at those moments that you're anchoring yourself more deeply into the truth of human existence. So when your meaning is ripped away and you can no longer take things for granted and everything is in question, something happens. This is what Kubler-Ross used to say about what happened. You'll see what I myself believe actually happens. Frankl said, and I like this, ultimately man should not ask what the meaning of life is, but rather must recognize that it is each of us that is being asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his or her own life. To life he can only respond by being responsible. Camus said it like this: in the depth of winter, I finally learned that there was in me an invincible summer. It is when you miss the summer that you can open yourself up to welcoming the summer and to truly know its value. I find this over and over and over again with my clients. It is when they are prepared to meet their fate and they're sitting there in that room with me, facing their distress, allowing it and working their way through it in real willingness to face up rather than to self-deceive, that together we find the rock bottom on which they can build, that together they find a way forward that they didn't even know was possible. Happiness, says Camus, is nothing except the simple harmony between a man or a woman and the life he or she leads. To find your own harmony with yourself, with other people, and with life changes everything. Nietzsche said, this is about the discipline of suffering, of great suffering. And he said, it is only granted to us to find our strength through suffering, through the discipline of great suffering. I like Tillich's formulation. He called it the courage to be. And he said the courage to be is the universal self-affirmation of one's own being as a part of all the being that's possible, in the presence of the threat to that being. And that's, of course, the threat of non-being. So it is again at those moments where we are most threatened that we can stand our ground and open up to discover the courage. He told us also how to integrate this. And he said a neurotic person can only take a little bit of non-being. To be neurotic is to want comfort, to run away from difficulty, to be afraid, to cover up, to not face up to truth, to find little reasons, little ways to make things seem okay, but therefore to make yourself more and more vulnerable. It is a bit like putting bandages on yourself all the time, or taking SSRIs. What you really need to do is get to the bottom of things and clear up the difficulties to the hill completely, so that you have solidity and you know you can stand in the winter and you can struggle back until the summer arises. Average people can do this a little bit. Creative people can accommodate more of this. And that is, I think, why so often helping people to find their creativity is what brings them out of their darkness back into the light. Because those two things go together. We saw it in the film yesterday. To find the pathway of art is often a way to bring life in its universal form back into your life. And therefore you can then stand more threats, more non-being, a broader range. God, says Tillich, as a theologian that he is, can tolerate an infinite amount of non-being. Sartre talks about the fear of truth. He says the fear of truth is the fear of freedom. And it is freedom that we experience when everything is broken away. I myself went through a very big crisis in my life in 1996 where I lost everything. And the one thing I didn't want anymore was freedom. I wanted to belong. I wanted to get back into some safety, horrifically much. But the first thing to face up to, if you want to do that, is that you now have a freedom in which you can create something. And that is about holding strong, even though we are afraid. It is about the courage to be. You see the fear in this guy's eyes? But you see his steadfastness as well. It is not my picture, I don't like war, but there is something about standing strong that we can learn from it nevertheless. I like, of course, all these films about the Second World War that show some people defying the opposite side of the equation, standing up to the Nazi regime. Not an easy thing to do. Most people got shot. This guy actually not only stood up to Himmler, but he got out of the camp several times over because he got into it again to go give food to some of the people in there. Extraordinary. What about this? The guy called Tank Man, who defied the armored panzered vehicles in Tiananmen Square in '89. I believe that if we face up to the laws of life at all levels of existence, and we live with the paradox of life, the constant challenge of human existence, then we find such strength, then we find something that is well worth cultivating. Do we then become happy in this lovely, silly way that my dog used to be happy at times? Images of happiness abound. All religions have pictures like Valhalla, Utopia, El Dorado, the Garden of Eden, Nirvana, and the land of the lotus eaters. But these are pictures and images. What we need to do while we are living our lives on earth is to actually be prepared for reality rather than for some ideal situation. The problems with happiness is that actually people are well aware that it isn't all it's cut out to be. There are some good philosophical arguments against it, which I have made in my book Psychotherapy and the Quest for Happiness, but I don't really have time to go into that now. Kierkegaard sorry for the Danish people in the room. Kierkegaard said that one of the good things that happened to human beings was to fall from paradise. Once we have eaten from the tree of knowledge, we cannot go back. We know there is good and evil. We know there is black and white. We know there is male and female. We know that life is not just nice. We know it is difficult. We have to work at it. We have to labor. Is that a bad thing? No, it is not. It is a good thing. Because from this, consciousness is developed. And from the development of our consciousness, we become able to transcend and to dialectically progress in life. I shan't talk about positive psychology and why I think it's wrong, except to show you the UNESCO map of well-being. This was a 2006 one. I tried to download the more recent one, but it was too sophisticated and you couldn't actually put it in on PowerPoint. It's so interesting. This is supposed to be, the well-being, the red countries. Really, it isn't about well-being at all. It is about affluence. These are the countries that are comfy. These are the countries where people are least deprived. But are they really the countries where people are living in the best way? I would challenge that very strongly indeed. I've traveled all over the world. I've spoken and lived with people in various countries, Indonesia, for instance, or China, or other places in the world where people live in very poor conditions, but sometimes with a real understanding of the things that matter in life. I don't want to be idealistic about it, because obviously there is huge amounts of deprivation and warfare as well, but certainly affluence is not the key to good living. Nietzsche said, can we have enduring happiness? No way. Happiness and unhappiness are twins that grow up together, and we have to face up to the dark and the light. One is always represented in the other, as Taoism knows so well. The positive psychologists, by the way, have done some interesting studies to show that sometimes the people who in high school said they were the happiest actually did worse 20 years later, because they didn't work as hard in college and they actually got less good jobs than the guys who said 20 years ago they were unhappy. Interesting? Not surprising. Not to me. It is by going down into the abyss of life that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble lies your treasure, said Joseph Campbell. And it is so true. It is the moments you are tripped up that you have to start looking at the earth again, and you have to ask yourself, where do I belong? What do I need to do? What are the lessons I can learn from this? I have come up with these various models about having a sort of background platform from which I can work with people and understand their particular predicaments in order to find for myself a map and a compass to help them find their way by. These are the dimensions of human existence, the physical with the challenge of life and death, that paradox always available, but lots of other things, health and illness, awakenness, sleeping, you name it. The social level at which, you have to deal with love and hate. The personal level, your strengths and your weaknesses. The spiritual level, the good and the evil. No time to go into the details. Just to say that the challenge is, at each of those levels, to face face the tensions, not to achieve the good, but to know how to be both with the good and the bad. So at the physical level, the challenge is the death and the pain. If you do face up to it, you will live life to the full. That's the paradox. If you don't face up to it, you'll find that you're not really living your life. You're hiding away from it, and you live in fear. At the social level, the challenges are about loneliness and rejection. If you try to get away from that, and you just avoid it, you'll end up bullying other people in order to dominate them and not feel your own vulnerability. Or you'll end up feeling so vulnerable that you'll be bullied. If you do face up to it, you stand a chance of learning to understand human relations and to get deeper with other people. Weakness and failure you have to face up at an individual level. The gain is strength and stamina. The loss, if you don't face up, is either to become narcissistic and think you're so wonderful, or to become self-destructive. At the spiritual level, the fear is about futility, meaninglessness. If you don't face up to it, you might well end up being fanatical about a secret, wonderful, safe solution to it. Or you might become apathetic. If you do face up, you will find your own personal ethics to live by. So don't lose yourself when life is tough. The only thing that overcomes hard luck is hard work. And the art of living is to be equal to whatever happens, no matter whether you call it good or bad. To be really in the good stuff when it's there, and to be really in the bad stuff when it is there, and to realize how precious our challenges actually are, how much they give us. A life without challenges is as insipid as a play or a film without challenges. If you look at the films that become classics, you will see they're about dramas. They're about human adversity overcome. They're about the struggle between opposites. The more they bring out that struggle, and the more they show the human capacity to overcome, and the more popular those films become. The more sweetie or avoidant they are, and the less success they have. It's the same with novels. It's the same with everything. We need that kind of contrast to be alive. Feelings are our pathway to our reflection about feelings. They are our pathway. When the limbic system kicks in, you need to make the most of it, not just to get it to whirl around on itself, but to get it to connect up to all the rest of the brain, to those prefrontal lobes, so that you can actually learn from the emotions, and that will harmonize the structures in your brain. Not in this kind of light-hearted way, but in a deeply felt way. Heidegger talks about this as Befindlichkeit, which means the way you find yourself. And you always find yourself in a certain way. You're always related to the world. You're always related to other people. You're always in a situation. And you always are affected by that world. You're always in a certain mood, in a certain atmosphere. Not only do you absorb atmospheres and respond and resonate to those, you also have the capacity to transform them and create them. This is who you are. You have that capacity to change your mood, to change the mood in those around you. It is a very powerful capacity. Emotions are like the weather. but we are creators of weather. There is never none. And the atmosphere we live in is very important. Kierkegaard talked about living as a kind of form of breathing. We have to breathe in and we have to breathe out. We can't just keep holding our breath and we can't just keep breathing in. It is about give and take. It is about growing and waning. Life is cyclical and both ends of the spectrum are required. So we have to learn to breathe in fully, and we have to learn to let go and pause. Not just in our breathing, but in the way in which we are in the world all the time. This is about our values, because our upswinging emotions, as I was explaining in the workshop yesterday, are about trying to achieve values that are dear to us. And our downswinging emotions are about the threat to the loss of those values. So there are basically four kinds of emotions. Some emotions are about the threat to our values, some about the loss of our values, some about the aspiration to new values, and some about gaining them. And so right on top here, you find a brief moment of happiness. Right here, you feel sad. The threat to the value leads to pride, where you're still kind of holding on, but you're already feeling you're going to lose it. Jealousy, when you're hogging it as hard as you can. Anger, when you're fighting your last-ditch attempt to keep your value. Despair, when you know you're going to lose it. Fear, when you run away, thinking it's too dangerous, non-being will overtake you. Sorrow, when you know you've lost it. Shame, when you try to go back up again and you feel you're too small, you can't manage it, you can't quite do it. It's too difficult. Envy, when you think, this is what I really want, but it's not for me, only for other people. Desire, when you go a bit further up and you think, yes, I know what I want, I know what is important. Then hope, yes, I can do it, it's possible. Love, I can connect, I can do the work, I can dedicate myself, I can connect. Joy, yes, it's work. And then back to the top. So that's my emotional compass, with a place for each of those kind of emotions, telling you about where you are in relation to a value. The other bit of the work is, of course, to recognize what are the person's values, and then to help them see that each time they go down and lose a value, and allow themselves to do that, and make the most of learning to be here, where they can see things you cannot see when you're holding on to your high position. That each time you do this, you climb back up to a slightly altered value. A value which is infinitely more valuable than the value you had lost. You learn to refine and hone your project. You learn to recognize what it is worth living for, worth working for, worth fighting for. And the better you get at allowing each of those emotions, and the less scared you get of going around, the easier your life will be. I've connected all this with the color wheel, being a bit of an artist myself. And so I came up with the emotional compass in this way, where you will see, at each position, there are numerous different words that show what that position is kind of like. And there are many more. I've played this 100 times, and there are many different versions of this. But, it will help you, once you got this in your head, it will help you really understand what a client is all about, and what they are feeling, and what it is in relation to. Of course, this is completely right in the way the spectrum of colors works. And the blue is the sorrow, and this is where the anger is, and this is where the envy is, and this is the love, and this is the happiness position. No time to go into it any further. I think we do actually experience the world in this emotional kind of way all the time. And it's up to us how much we open ourselves to that, and how much of that emotion we can hold, and how much truth and how much reality we can take, and therefore how much we are able to transform the difficulties of life into new learning and into something positive. But it is always about the challenge of facing the conflicts and facing the crises. It is about recognizing that anxiety, far from being a symptom of mental illness, is actually when our energy is on the rise in this upswing of emotion towards a purpose. It is about facing the responsibility of making something of the challenge and use our anxiety. It is about going beyond happiness because we're open to the whole spectrum of emotions. It is not just about meaning and purpose, but it is about truth, about learning life better and better, getting to know it better and better, getting more able to live all the time. In that is incredible value in its own right. This is about allowing both being and nothingness. It is about learning to be in life. And in that process, one of the challenges is to make suffering meaningful. Of course, there are many things that help in doing that. And again, I don't really have time to talk about it. But to me, the key has always been to help clients to find that the trauma is in some ways a challenge to them, and that they can use it in some way. Not just to build their own character, but to understand life better, and to make them more compassionate, both towards themselves and towards other people. And very often, clients choose to do something with that actively, and to enable other people to also learn this lesson later on. I've used Baumeister's ideas of 4 ways in which we create value to fit it in with my 4 levels of the world. So it is always about those 4 layers. Finding a new, more solid way of being embodied. Finding a better way of being of value with other people, contributing something to the world. Finding a bigger sense of self-worth, a sense that it is important to live one's life. And find a sense of purpose, knowing there is something you want to do with your life, to actually make your life count. My feeling is always that once a person has been given suffering by life, this means they have been marked out to be equal to that suffering, and they always can find a way to do that. This is an idea that inspired me from Arthur Lang, of course, before I came over to work with Ronnie, which was the idea that we must not allow ourselves to break down, but every breakdown can be actually a breakthrough. Now, to actually make that work in a therapeutic community takes quite a bit more than a nice theory, but with hard work it can be done. My philosophical background has made me incredibly appreciative of the idea of dialectics, the Hegelian idea of dialectics, where everything is in opposition to something else, but out of that you create a new synthesis. And so there is a spiraling up of human experience to an ever greater capacity capacity for encompassing paradox and conflict. I was going to give you an example of work with one of my clients who lost her husband and small son in a car accident, who I worked with for 2.5 years, but I can't really go into the detail. If you're interested in it, it is the long case study. I've described it in great detail. My whole structural existential analysis with Rita is there in the second edition of my book, Everyday Mysteries. So the way I work is I allow myself to absorb. I do exactly the opposite of what I used to teach my students when I taught, beginning counseling and psychotherapy students. I let myself totally identify with their distress. I absorb it. I make it my own. And from there, I find my own strength with it. And once I can face it properly, really, from my real sense of what it would be like for me to be in their position, totally and utterly, then I can face the truth. And if I can face the truth of their distress with them, I know they will too. It might take a couple of years, but I'll see it through with them. I always see it through with them. And they do. I have seen some people facing up to some amazing things, and I have absolute faith and trust in the human capacity to overcome disaster and difficulty. But what it takes is the loving togetherness with people who are willing to face truth. And that is what I basically do. And when you face the truth, you learn to love the truth, and you learn to love life in all its paradoxical, challenging horrors and all its beauty. And that is absolutely worthwhile. This is from my book, the book on happiness. There are greater values than happiness. There is love, truth, beauty, loyalty, honor, courage, and freedom. So that is what I believe we have to do. We have to trust that we can discover what is true, what is possible, and what is right, and learn to live in a courageous and right way. And then life kicks in. This is something I have learned. When a person stands in their trouble, life brings luck. Our luck will change. These are people liberated from a concentration camp. We endure, we wait patiently, we survive and count our blessings, and we are united with our value. We learn to help others. Bushfires in Australia. And we can also have a sense of humor and flower power, put flowers on the guns. When the going gets tough, that's me trying to be tough in a very small way. The tough get going, that was a tree that blew over in the store. Digby and I worked hard to get rid of it. Very satisfying. This is how you discover about the light and dark of life. There is a time for the sun to shine, and there is a time to be resting at night. Both are important. And you know, when it's dark enough, you can see the stars. And that is well worthwhile. And eventually, Earth rises. Thank you very much.
Rich lectures are giving us a lot of things to think about, to digest.